The day my reputation began to fall apart did not start with drama. It started quietly, like any other workday. I arrived early, logged in, and reviewed my tasks. Nothing felt wrong. No warnings. No emails marked urgent. Just routine. My name is Christian Ferguson, and I had worked at the company long enough to know how things usually felt. That morning felt different, but I couldn't explain why. People greeted me, but their voices were stiff. Smiles didn't last long. It was as if everyone knew something I didn't. By mid-morning, I noticed I was no longer included in a message thread I had always been part of. I told myself it was a mistake. Later, a meeting room went silent when I walked past it. The door closed quickly. I didn't ask questions. I kept working. At lunch, I ate alone for the first time in years. That was when I understood something important. A story about me was already moving. And I was not part of it. The first clear sign came during a team meeting later that week. I took my usual seat and opened my notebook, ready to listen. The meeting moved along normally until my manager paused. His eyes drifted toward me, then away again. He spoke about concerns around professionalism and trust. He never said my name, but he didn't need to. The room grew quiet. Several people avoided looking at me. No one asked what he meant. When the meeting ended, people left quickly. A coworker who once joked with me every morning suddenly checked his phone and walked past. Another gave me a short nod, like a stranger. Back at my desk, I opened my email. A new message sat at the top. Human Resources. A meeting scheduled for later in the week. No explanation. I stared at the screen for a long time. I thought about replying. I thought about asking what this was about. Instead, I closed the email. Whatever was happening was already bigger than questions. Over the next 2 days, the atmosphere around me changed completely. Conversations stopped when I walked near them. People lowered their voices, then glanced at me. I became careful, even when I hadn't done anything wrong. I heard pieces of the story by accident. Not directly. Never clearly. Just fragments. Words like risk, unreliable, and not honest. Each word landed harder than the last. None of it was true. I stayed quiet and focused on my work. I met deadlines. I answered emails politely. I acted as if nothing was wrong, but inside, I paid attention. I noticed who avoided me and who didn't. I noticed who repeated the same phrases. That night, I opened my laptop at home and reviewed old emails. I checked project logs and message histories. Something stood out. The accusations didn't match the timelines. The story had gaps. Whoever was telling it hadn't been careful. That was when I chose to stay silent. The HR meeting felt formal and distant. 2 representatives sat across from me with folders on the table. They spoke calmly, but their questions were based on assumptions, not facts. They asked about behavior I didn't recognize. Actions I hadn't taken. Decisions I hadn't made. I answered slowly and honestly. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't raise my voice. I noticed their surprise. They were waiting for emotion. For panic. For excuses. I asked one question. What evidence is being used? There was a pause. One of them said the investigation was still ongoing. More information was being gathered. I nodded and thanked them for their time. As I walked out, I felt something settle in my chest. Not fear. Clarity. They didn't have proof. But they were collecting stories. That afternoon, I began documenting everything. Emails. Meeting notes. Dates. Exact words. I backed everything up. I wasn't preparing to argue. I was preparing to wait. After the HR meeting, the pressure increased. My workload became lighter without explanation. Projects I had started were reassigned. Meetings disappeared from my calendar. Each change was small, but together they sent a clear message. They wanted me uncomfortable. One afternoon, A coworker questioned my work in front of others. His tone was casual, but the message was sharp. Another manager hinted that my future at the company was uncertain. The story about me was no longer quiet. It was spreading freely. At home, I organized my records carefully. I built timelines. I compared versions of events. Patterns began to appear. The same names. The same source. The same careless changes in details. They were adding to the lie now, trying to make it stronger. Instead, they were making it weaker. I could have spoken earlier. I could have defended myself right away. But unfinished lies are protected. Complete lies fall apart. So I stayed calm. And I let them continue. By the next week, my name felt heavy inside the office. When I walked past desks, conversations shifted. People stopped mid-sentence. I became something uncomfortable, like a reminder no one wanted around. My manager stopped giving me direct instructions. Instead, tasks came through short emails with no detail. If something went wrong, the blame found me anyway. I noticed how quickly stories changed when they were repeated. I kept my head down and wrote everything down. One afternoon, I was asked to hand over access to a system I had managed for years. No reason was given. I complied without protest. The look on my manager's face told me he expected resistance. There was none. That silence confused them. At home, I updated my records. The dates lined up clearly now. The accusations started only after a certain project review. Before that, there was nothing negative on record. Someone had needed a reason, and they had created one. I realized then that this was no accident. It was a decision someone had made. The longer I stayed quiet, the more confident they became. I could see it in the way meetings were handled. Decisions were made without me, then explained as if I had agreed. My name was used carefully, always followed by doubt. One coworker began repeating the same story to different people. I noticed because the details kept changing. One day, I was careless. The next, I was dishonest. The story grew darker each time. I let it. HR sent another email asking for follow-up questions. I replied politely and provided only facts. No opinions. No emotion. I could tell they were confused by my tone. It didn't match the picture they were being given. That worked in my favor. At night, I reviewed voice messages and meeting summaries. I highlighted contradictions. I labeled files clearly and stored copies outside my work system. I wasn't planning revenge. I was building clarity. And clarity needs time. They were giving me plenty of it. One morning, I arrived to find my desk moved. Not far, but enough to notice. I was now placed near the back, away from the main team. No one explained why. I sat down and logged in like nothing had changed. During lunch, I overheard two coworkers talking about me. They didn't know I was close enough to hear. One said I was probably already on my way out. The other said it was sad but expected. I finished my lunch quietly and returned to work. That evening, I added their words to my notes. Date, time, location, exact phrasing. The story around me was now accepted as truth. That was dangerous for them. Lies grow careless when they are believed. Later that week, a manager asked me why I hadn't defended myself. His tone was almost curious. I told him the truth. There's nothing to explain yet. He frowned, confused. I knew then the silence was working. They didn't understand it. The investigation dragged on, but only for me. For everyone else, the conclusion already felt decided. I was treated like a problem waiting to be removed. Still, no official action came. That made some people nervous. I noticed pressure shifting. Meetings became tense. Emails were rewritten multiple times before being sent. People started protecting themselves instead of pushing the story forward. That was new. One afternoon, HR asked for a full timeline of my work on a past project. I provided it within an hour. Clean. Clear. backed by records. There was no reply for 2 days. When it came, the tone was different. Shorter. More careful. That night, I reviewed everything again. The more I checked, the clearer it became. If the truth came out now, it would not be a debate. It would be obvious. But I still didn't move. They hadn't finished yet. There were still gaps in their story. And gaps invite mistakes. I was willing to wait for them. The mistake came sooner than I expected. A team-wide email was sent late one evening. It mentioned an incident I was supposedly involved in. The date was wrong. The project name was wrong. The details didn't match any record. And worst of all, several people were copied. I saved the email immediately. The next morning, people acted tense. Someone had realized the error. I could feel it in the air. The story had stretched too far. HR contacted me again. This time, they asked for my version of that specific incident. I replied calmly and attached supporting files. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't explain beyond the facts. That afternoon, a meeting was scheduled. Higher-level managers were included now. That hadn't happened before. Something had shifted. For the first time, I saw doubt replace certainty in their faces. They were starting to realize something important. The reputation they destroyed wasn't collapsing anymore. It was waiting. And it was ready. The meeting took place in a smaller conference room than usual. That alone told me something had changed. Fewer people were invited, but their roles mattered more. HR was there. 2 senior managers were there. My direct manager avoided my eyes. They asked me to walk through my work history step by step. I did. Slowly. Clearly. I used dates, project names, and saved messages. I watched as they took notes. Real notes this time. When they brought up the accusations, I asked them to read them aloud. Hearing the words spoken made the room feel smaller. The claims sounded weaker when placed next to facts. No one interrupted me. At the end, one manager asked why I had waited so long to respond in detail. I answered honestly. I was waiting for the full picture. That answer stayed in the air longer than anything else said that day. For the first time, the silence wasn't mine alone. After that meeting, people treated me differently. Not kindly. Not yet. But carefully. Conversations no longer stopped when I walked past. Instead, they slowed. Words were chosen more carefully. My manager sent a short message asking to talk later in the week. No tone. No pressure. That was new. HR requested additional documents. I sent them within minutes. Each file was labeled clearly. Each timeline matched the last. There were no gaps. That speed unsettled them. At home, I reviewed my notes again. I realized something important. The lies hadn't just damaged me. They had exposed weaknesses in the company's process. Rules had been ignored. Complaints had been accepted without proof. Someone had used the system. And now the system was looking back. I still didn't speak publicly. I didn't correct co-workers. I didn't defend myself in meetings. The story around me began to stall. When lies stop growing, they start to sink. I could feel it happening. The shift became obvious when a coworker apologized to me quietly near the coffee machine. He didn't say much. Just that he was sorry for believing things too quickly. I thanked him and said nothing else. Later that day, I was added back into a project thread I had been removed from weeks earlier. No explanation. Just an invitation, like nothing had happened. I accepted it. HR scheduled another meeting, this time labeled review. The word felt heavier than discussion. I noticed my manager looked nervous during the day. He avoided jokes. Avoided confidence. In the meeting, HR asked detailed questions about how information had moved through the team. Who said what? When? How decisions were made. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about responsibility. I answered carefully and truthfully. I didn't point fingers. I didn't need to. The records spoke. When the meeting ended, one HR representative said something that confirmed everything. We should have asked these questions earlier. I nodded. So should have everyone else. The next week felt quiet, but not peaceful. Emails slowed down. Meetings were postponed. Decisions were delayed. The company was thinking, and that made people uncomfortable. I noticed managers meeting behind closed doors. Names were mentioned carefully. The same names I had seen in my records. One afternoon, my direct manager finally asked to speak with me. His voice was low. He said there had been missteps and assumptions. He didn't apologize. I didn't ask for one. He asked why I never pushed back when things first started. I looked at him and told the truth. Because I wanted everything documented. He didn't respond right away. That evening, HR sent a formal update. The investigation had expanded. The wording was neutral, but the meaning was clear. This was no longer about a single employee. At home, I closed my laptop and sat quietly. They had finished building the story. Now it was being taken apart, piece by piece. The company called an all-hands meeting the following Friday. That had never happened for something like this before. The room was full. Faces were serious. No one joked. A senior executive spoke about values, fairness, and accountability. Then he mentioned a review process that had failed. He didn't say my name. He didn't need to. He said changes were coming. That procedures would be corrected. That leadership decisions were under review. I watched the room carefully. Some people looked relieved. Others looked afraid. After the meeting, several co-workers approached me. Some apologized. Some avoided details. I accepted their words without comment. HR sent me a final request later that day. Confirmation of records already submitted. I replied with a simple yes. That night, I realized something had fully shifted. I was no longer defending myself. The system was doing it for me. They had destroyed my reputation once. Now the truth was restoring it. Quietly, relentlessly, and without asking permission. By Monday, the office felt different. People who had whispered and avoided me were now careful in ways I could measure. Their words slowed. Emails were reviewed twice. Meetings included more fact-checking. The lies they had built were showing cracks, and everyone noticed. My manager approached me quietly. He said nothing about the past. Instead, he asked for clarification on old project decisions. I provided them carefully, with clear references to emails and meeting notes. Each answer was calm and precise. Later, HR called me for a brief discussion. Their tone was neutral, but I sensed hesitation. The gaps in the story were obvious to them now. They weren't asking questions to catch me, they were checking facts. By mid-afternoon, I realized something important. The investigation that had caused months of stress was now working in my favor. Those who had built the false narrative were beginning to question each other. Confusion was spreading quietly, and it was almost invisible. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I simply continued to document, to organize, and to wait. The cracks grew faster than I expected. A senior manager, one of the sources of the false story, was caught contradicting himself in an email chain. He didn't realize I had a copy. I noticed immediately. The others noticed too. During a team briefing, someone mentioned a project milestone I had completed. Another person corrected them, citing my actual records. A small silence fell over the room as they realized the facts didn't match the narrative. I remained quiet. I didn't need to explain. The truth was working silently, like a shadow. Every small correction, every tiny detail, chipped away at the story that had tormented me for weeks. At home, I reviewed timelines one last time before the weekend. Each entry lined up perfectly. Every inconsistency could now be traced to a single source. Patterns were clear, undeniable. I understood the full scope. The false narrative had grown because people assumed I wouldn't respond. They hadn't counted on patience and careful observation. They had underestimated me. Monday morning brought subtle shifts. HR called for a meeting with all department heads. The tone was different this time. There was no blame in the air, just careful questions, documentation requests, and controlled discussions. I walked past the conference room and noticed my manager hesitating before entering. His expression betrayed concern. Someone else had been found misreporting events. They had been careless, and it showed. During my own review, I answered every question calmly. Dates, actions, emails, logs. Nothing was omitted. I didn't emphasize my correctness. I let the documentation speak for itself. Later that afternoon, I overheard discussions about correcting previous reports and clarifying responsibilities. The people who had contributed to the false story were now anxious, rechecking everything they had said. At my desk, I smiled faintly. Not because I felt victorious. Not yet. But because the process was working. The story that had destroyed my reputation was unraveling in the exact way I had anticipated. And I hadn't even moved yet. By midweek, tension in the office was thick. People whispered more cautiously, aware their words were being scrutinized. Managers double-checked facts before approving anything. The atmosphere felt almost like a slow storm, charged but controlled. One co-worker who had originally spread rumors approached me. He avoided eye contact and offered a quiet apology. I nodded politely. Nothing more. I had no need to confront him. The system was correcting itself. HR requested another set of confirmations. I supplied them immediately, organized clearly. Each record matched the next, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Late that day, I noticed the senior manager who had once aggressively accused me pausing in the hallway. His shoulders were tense. The story he had helped build was now turning on him, piece by piece. I felt a strange sense of calm. The chaos they had tried to create had slowed. Patience had done what words could not. I had let them finish first. Now, the reckoning was beginning. Thursday arrived with quiet intensity. The company scheduled an official meeting to review the investigation findings. This time, I wasn't anxious. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. During the meeting, the gaps and contradictions in the false story were revealed. Emails, logs, and project documentation all confirmed my account. The people responsible could not explain the inconsistencies. My manager avoided eye contact entirely. HR treated me with professional respect, noting my patience and diligence. The atmosphere shifted subtly, relief and shame mixed in the room. Afterward, senior executives spoke privately with those who had misrepresented facts. I watched from a distance as they quietly corrected mistakes and admitted errors. No shouting. No drama. Just facts. As I returned to my desk, I realized the truth had done the work I had waited for. My reputation, once under fire, was now intact and stronger. For the first time in months, I felt a lightness in my chest. Justice had arrived quietly, slowly, and perfectly timed. Friday morning, the atmosphere in the office felt electric, though silent. People moved carefully. Conversations were clipped. I sensed tension and shame, but also relief in some faces. The lies that had spread so fast were unraveling completely. HR and senior executives began addressing the team. They outlined what had been found: inconsistencies, misreporting, and breaches of protocol. They didn't single anyone out harshly, but the responsibility was clear. The room was still, listening carefully. I stayed at my desk, observing. Nothing I said would add more weight. The facts spoke louder than any words I could offer. Colleagues who had once avoided me now glanced with unease. Their confidence in spreading falsehoods had faltered. Later, a manager quietly approached. His voice low, he admitted mistakes in how he had handled accusations. I nodded. No words of revenge passed my lips. 4 months, they had tried to destroy me. But patience and precision had done more than anger or confrontation ever could. The balance had shifted. Over the next few days, the office settled into a new rhythm. Meetings were organized more transparently. Decisions were documented. Communication was checked and double-checked. The culture of careless rumors had vanished almost overnight. Some colleagues apologized quietly. Some avoided conversations entirely. Others seemed relieved the situation was resolved. None of this required my involvement. I remained calm, continuing my work, letting the system correct itself. One former source of false claims was reassigned to another department. Another faced formal review. I learned of these changes indirectly. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The most striking change was in my own sense of space. The fear that had hung over me like a shadow for months lifted slowly, leaving clarity in its place. I realized the truth had been enough. Silence and patience had been my allies. At the end of the week, I closed my laptop, took a deep breath, and let the weight of relief settle. Justice had arrived quietly. By the following Monday, normal work resumed, but with caution. People who had once questioned my integrity now treated me with respect. They didn't need to acknowledge the past. Their behavior said enough. I was included in new projects immediately. My input was sought openly. Managers consulted me without hesitation. The reputation they had tried to destroy now strengthened my position. HR continued minor follow-ups. Every document and log was reviewed again, confirming the previous findings. The evidence of truth was undeniable. The story that had tormented me months before now existed only as a lesson in accountability. I watched quietly as the people who had built false narratives adjusted their behavior. The fear of exposure replaced arrogance. There were no harsh words, no dramatic confrontations, just subtle shifts and careful actions. In those days, I realized that revenge did not need to be loud. Sometimes, patience, preparation, and letting the system work are far more powerful. By midweek, I felt a sense of closure. My desk, my inbox, my calendar, everything was back in order. Work felt familiar again, but it carried a new weight. I had survived an orchestrated attack on my reputation and emerged without losing my integrity. Conversations around me became professional again. The whispers, the side glances, the subtle doubts, all gone. It was as if the office had learned, slowly but permanently, that false narratives collapse when faced with facts. I didn't seek confrontation with anyone. I didn't make a public statement. Justice had arrived quietly, methodically, and visibly. For the first time in months, I walked through the office with ease. I felt calm, confident, free. The months of anxiety, fear, and careful observation had yielded a clear lesson. Patience and documentation were stronger than immediate retaliation. I sat at my desk and opened my calendar. The future felt steady, unshaken, and mine again. The story ended quietly, as it had begun. No dramatic confrontation. No shouting. No visible revenge. Just facts, patience, and careful observation. I had let them finish. I had waited while lies grew, confident that truth would survive. And it did. The people who had sought to destroy me had done so without noticing that their own mistakes were visible to anyone paying attention. Now, their errors were corrected. Accountability had taken hold. My reputation, once under threat, was stronger than before. The company had learned. Colleagues had learned. And I had learned too. At the end of the day, I closed my laptop and left the office. Outside, the air felt lighter. 4 months, I had endured doubt, whispers, and fear. Now, I walked away with clarity, quiet satisfaction, and the knowledge that patience, preparation, and silence can be more powerful than anger. They had destroyed my reputation once. I had let them finish first. And I had won.